So today I will teach you how to heal your grief. For those of us who have endured childhood trauma, grief is a natural response to emotional, psychological, and spiritual wounds that leave a long lasting imprint on our life. Healing from childhood trauma involves grieving for what was not given to us and what was lost, whether it was safety, stability, trust, love. So, finding meaning, purpose, and resolution in the grief process becomes our job. So, today I will explore different stages of grief, how they manifest for trauma survivors, and how do we move through different stages of grief to find healing. I will also discuss ways to honor and release grief and offer practical tools to cultivate self love and self compassion as a part of your healing journey. So let us begin. What are different stages of grief for a trauma survivor? So, the five stages of grief were introduced by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in order to provide us with a framework for understanding the complex emotion of grief and loss. And these stages can be applied to the grief of trauma survivors in order to help us heal. So let us understand what are these five stages of grief and how do we apply this to our own healing. So, number one, denial. The first stage of denial is often a defense mechanism for a trauma survivor. Denial can manifest as an inability to accept the truth or acknowledge the depth of the pain and suffering that a trauma survivor is going through. Trauma survivors are so good at repressing, suppressing, denying their trauma so that they can keep on going. So, denial is a defense mechanism. So, trauma survivors will minimize the impact of their trauma to themselves and convince their own selves that it wasn't that bad. Or we try to suppress painful memories. So, when trauma survivors are in denial stage, they avoid seeking help, they avoid talking about their feelings, they avoid confronting difficult circumstances because the weight of the truth feels unbearable and overwhelming. It is too painful to look at what happened or what is happening. That is why we deny it and suppress it. So, a common manifestation of denial in trauma survivors is dissociation, where the mind will detach from the emotional pain and just zone out. Denial protects us from being overwhelmed initially, but it is important to recognize when denial is holding us back from living and healing. Stage number two is anger. When denial fades and we begin to accept that this is what happened, this is what somebody who said they loved me, this is what they did to me. So when denial fades and you accept, you acknowledge what happens, that's when feelings of anger come up. Anger helps you move forward. So we feel angry towards people who hurt us, people who failed to protect us, or people who participated by being silent while we were being abused or hurt. So, this anger can be directed outward at family member, institutions, society, parents, sibling, partners, or this anger can be turned inwards and manifest as depression. So, internalized anger is depression. The anger stage can be chaotic, overwhelming, but it is an important part of feeling your feelings. So you have to feel your anger in order to move on to the next stage. Repressed anger can have devastating effects, so it is essential to express your anger in a healthy manner. You can feel your feelings, talk about your feelings, yell out your feelings, talk about your anger, write your anger, find creative outlets or physical activities like breath work, exercise, speaking your truth, writing your truth. Your anger is justified. Your anger needs to be accepted, validated, and expressed in order for you to heal and move forward to the next stage. So, the third stage after you've expressed your anger is bargaining. In the bargaining stage, trauma survivors may try to make sense of their pain by questioning. The what ifs come up during this stage, and they engage in self blame. Maybe I did this. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe what if I said this? I didn't say that. I should have done this. I could have, right? They think that if I had acted differently, this wouldn't have happened. If I could change, this would get fixed. So, this stage reflects the mind's desire to regain control somehow over something that feels senseless, unjust. So we just want to be on top. We just want to have control. We just want to understand, right? We just want resolution, some type of closure, some type of understanding. So, bargaining is a way for trauma survivors to try and reclaim that power in a situation that made them feel powerless. Many times, survivors recreate similar situations of the past in order to heal them in the present moment. You might be recreating the same fight, that power struggle that you had with your parents, with your partner now, right? That's an example. So it's important for you to see that your trauma is not your fault, but healing it, and healing it is your responsibility. But healing is not about changing or fixing or even completely understanding the past. Healing is about reclaiming control of the present, not changing or reclaiming control of the past. The powerlessness that you felt in the past, we switch it over and release it in the present. We don't try to regain control over that powerless past. The past is gone. So, number four, depression, which is the longest stage, and it emerges as the survivor fully understand the grasp and the weight of their loss and pain. Depression happens when you understand that all this happened and decades of my life are lost, or this loss happened to me because of somebody else. So, this stage is sadness, withdrawal, feelings of hopelessness. So, trauma survivors, depression is tied to the sense of, having lost our childhood, or having lost faith in humanity, or ability to trust others lost, right? Or even sense of self is lost. So that depression, that stage, survivors feel overwhelmed with emotional heaviness at this stage, and they seek, and if you're healing, this is the time to seek support. While it's natural to feel deep sorrow at this time, it is important to remind yourself that this stage is part of the healing process. Depression is not permanent. It is not your identity. You can manage it with support and tools that we will discuss. You can transform that feelings of hopeless powerlessness and hopelessness into deeper understanding, healing, meaning, purpose, and direction. So that's what healing is. Healing your trauma means you find direction ahead. The trauma doesn't control you, it doesn't define you, it doesn't hold you back. Number five, fifth stage is acceptance of what happened, how it affected you, how it changed the course of your life. Acceptance means understanding the lessons that you have learned. Acceptance does not mean forgetting or condoning the traumatic events, but it means coming to terms with what happened and integrating that wisdom and experience into your life. This stage is about acknowledging the pain, the loss, the heartache, the grief, but also recognizing that healing is possible, that there is a place forward after this. For trauma survivors, acceptance means releasing the need to change, question, doubt the past, releasing the powerlessness and hopelessness of the past, and focusing on building your current life in alignment with your true present day values, needs, and your authentic self. So it's the fifth stage in healing when trauma survivors finally begin to see that they're not defined by their past trauma, that it is possible to cultivate a fulfilling life despite the pain that you have endured. So, how do we do this? What are the steps? What are the actual steps to finding resolution, healing, meaning in grief? So, grieving childhood, first thing you need to understand is that grieving childhood trauma is not a linear process. And you have to visit those stages of grief multiple times throughout your healing journey. So, the key to finding resolution lies in recognizing that grief is not something you overcome, but it is something to be honored, processed, and released over time. It is to be integrated over time. That this is your life story, that and you get to write it, and you get to integrate the meaning into your life. So the first step is acknowledging the loss. And this is what I do in my retreats, in my coaching, in my book as well. In my book, this content is from the five self-love languages. So in this chapter, in the chapter on self-parenting your grief, I talk about number one, acknowledge your loss. Before healing can occur, survivors have to acknowledge how deeply they were hurt and betrayed and belittled or insulted or disrespected or abused. This may mean grieving not only the trauma itself, but also the aspects of their childhood that were stolen: safety, trust, innocence. This step requires courage and vulnerability, as it involves confronting painful emotions and memories, right? So you have to sit with your inner child, and you have to face that grief of all that your inner child did not receive, of all that they wished that was there, of all the pain and suffering that your inner child went through. You have to sit with that pain, acknowledge that pain, and apologize to your inner child that they had to go through all this alone. Then, step number two, finding meaning, purpose, and wisdom in your suffering. One of the most profound ways to heal from trauma is by finding meaning in your suffering. This does not mean that trauma is deserved or justified or needed for your growth, but as a survivor, you step into your power, and you choose your experience as a catalyst for growth, strength, empathy, right? The big changes, right? Many trauma survivors find purpose in helping other people. Like myself, I help other people so that they don't have to go through the pain of being unhealed for as long as I did, right? That's why I advocate for change and healing and growth and movement in your life. If you're stuck with grief, look at how you can, which stage you are in, and then how can you move forward in your grief stages, in your grief process. Because grief is a burden that will sit with you till the day you die. Grief will eat you alive if you let it. All right, so number three, this third step. So, first you acknowledge your suffering deeply, then you find meaning, wisdom, purpose in your suffering, then you integrate the experience. Resolution comes from not forgetting the trauma, but from integrating it into one's life. You are stronger because of it. You are more resilient because of it. You are not stuck because of your trauma. You are not your trauma. Your life is not defined, or your identity is not defined by your trauma, right? So, integrating the experience means you recognize that while trauma shaped who you are, it does not define who you are. It does not dictate the life you will lead. right? So survivors can learn to see their scars as evidence of their resilience rather than a source of shame or inadequacy, or this happened to me, or I'm a victim. You have to rewrite your story as not as the victim, but somebody who rose up to take control of their life. And it happens with a lot of support, a lot of education, a lot of practice, and daily healing and recovery work, right? So then integration involves understanding that grief will continue to arise at times throughout your life during milestones, challenges, anniversaries. So you, rather than resisting your grief, you practice self compassion and you allow yourself to grieve in a healthy, constructive way, right? And you keep a handle on your grief. So now practice the self compassion skills that I've taught you before, such as looking at your suffering, looking at your inner child and saying, I feel your grief. I see your pain. And I'm with you to support you through this. You are not alone. That's what compassion is. Self compassion is when you tell yourself that you are not alone in your suffering, right? All right. So then, how do you honor and release your grief? Number one, you surrender. Surrendering your grief is an act of profound healing. When you hold on to grief, it creates an emotional block that prevents you from truly being yourself. Your heart is closed when it's burdened with grief. By surrendering our grief, right, in a ceremony, you can surrender your grief to God, nature, universe, to higher power, and you allow yourself to feel the full extent of the pain without resistance. You give your pain space to unconditionally exist. And this opens a door for transformation. When we no longer fight our emotions, but accept them as a part of our life's story, right? So, what is surrender? Surrender means you focus on acknowledging and sitting with your grief without judgment, and you let the grief move, breathe, exist, and then surrender it to a power greater than yourself. So, practices like journaling, meditation, support groups will help you create a safe space for this process. Excuse me. It is through surrender we honor grief, we allow it to naturally release, and that brings us peace and deeper emotional freedom. Excuse me. So, surrender is a process that will help you release grief over and over and over again. Number two, create to release your grief. So when you give your grief a creative expression, it can find a way to move and process. So whether it's through art or business venture or charity work or any other meaningful activity, you give your grief a voice and a place to exist. Creating something from your pain transforms it. It offers it a sense of purpose and a connection to your emotions, like creating an altar for the loved ones that have passed, or creating a painting for love that you miss, that you wish you had, right? So, engaging in creative activities helps you create a container for your grief, and the grief can live in it, and you can visit with it and sit with it, and this process soothes you and nurtures you, and it gives a creative outlet and expression for your grief. Like crying is an outlet for grief, right? Similarly, you can creatively express your grief to release it. Then number three, You can create rituals of release. So engage in symbolic rituals that allow you to release grief. This could involve writing letters to rescue and soothe your younger self, creating artwork, participating in a personal ceremony where you symbolically release the pain to ocean or to fire, burning a letter you wrote, sorting away the grief on a flower, right? Or surrendering it at a place of worship. At an ocean or a lake or anywhere in nature where you feel comforted and connected to your higher power, you surrender your grief in ritual, in prayer, in communication with God. You surrender, you release, you sit with it in compassion. You give your grief is energy, right? It can either stay stuck in your body or you can express it and move it and honor it and release it, right? And then number four, of course, journaling is an effective tool for processing grief, right? Trauma survivors can use journaling to explore their emotions, reflect on their experiences, and track their growth and relationship with grief over time. There's grief journaling you can do. So, writing about grief gives it a voice. It allows your grief to be acknowledged and expressed rather than repressed, where it blocks your body and closes your heart and creates disease and inflammation, right? So, number five, of course, grief therapy, coaching, support groups, right? Professional coaching can help you move grief and trauma out of your body. EMDR is very effective for grief processing. Then tapping is so effective for moving energy in your body. And of course, nothing can help you more in healing grief than community. Community and a group of people who understand and can relate to your pain is very healing for human beings. Number six, dancing to heal your grief, movement to heal your grief, hiking and going on pilgrimages is to heal your grief, breath work to heal your grief, right? Being in nature to heal your grief, to send messages to heal your grief, right? Then self attunement and self compassion. Throughout the grief process, it is important for trauma survivors to cultivate self compassion, which means offering themselves the same kindness, understanding, support, listening ear that they would to a loved one who is grieving with patience, right? So when grief arises, practice self soothing with tapping, repeating affirmations, engaging in gentle self care, allowing yourself to rest for most and honor and respect that grief because it is love. You are grieving because there is love lost. So honor and respect that love. For the most relentless grief, practice all the self compassion skills taught in my book to soothe you through grief stages. Grieving and healing childhood trauma is not a quick or an easy process. It requires time, practice, and willingness. Willingness to confront and surrender painful emotions over and over again. You have to feel your grief, honor your grief, release your grief, feel your grief, give it meaning, give it purpose, and release your grief. Move, breathe, speak, write, connect, be in nature. You have to move your grief, feel your grief in order to heal your grief, right? So, how self parenting your grief is how you find healing, resolution, and meaning in life. As you move through different stages of grief, my hope for you is that you will sit with yourself with faith in the universe, trust in yourself, and know that people before you have healed grief with resilience, strength, and compassion. You can heal your grief. It is an ongoing journey, but with the right tools, you can find inner peace, wholeness, and capacity to live a fulfilling, empowered life.